And thank you, ladies and gentlemen from across the Louisiana plain. Welcome to our platform where we are advancing the cause of constitutional conservatism, elevating good conservative candidates, and measure by measure draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom. Welcome, everyone. We are so thrilled that you're joining us and have chosen to spend part of your day with us. It just means the world to us. Also, a huge, huge thank you for your encouragement, your prayers, and your financial support. It really does keep us going. If you are looking for a way to support us or advertise with us or just send us feedback, please do so on our website. It's freedomstate.us. And we are steadily marching toward Election Day on October 14th. So, Chris and I are continuing the endorsement series. We hope that you're enjoying it. We hope that you are sharing episodes with your friends and family who live in the districts we're covering. As we usually say, we know that most of these will not pertain to your voting decisions directly, but they will pertain to the state of your freedom going forward. So please, please continue to listen and share. As a reminder, you can send friends and family members short snack size clips of our candidates. You can do that from our YouTube and Rumble channels. Both of those have links on freedomstate.us. We also have links to those in the show notes. And today we have with us a statesman, a patriot, and a true conservative, Ray Garofalo, who is running for state senate in District 1. Before we introduce you to Ray, I will read the scripture of the day. It is Psalm 45, verses 2 through 4. And it says, "Beautiful, beautiful beyond the sons of men, elegant grace pours out through every word you speak. Truly, God has anointed you his favored one for eternity. Now strap your lightning sword of judgment upon your side, O mighty warrior, so majestic. You are full of beauty and splendor as you go out to war. In your glory and grandeur, go forth in victory. Through your faithfulness and meekness, the cause of truth and justice will stand. Awe-inspiring miracles are accomplished by your power, leaving everyone dazed and astonished." And I do believe, as I think many of you know by now, I do believe that we're in a spiritual war. It's all around us, but the Lord is fighting for us, and he, as I like to remind us, is already victorious. It's through his faithfulness and his meekness, which Representative Amity reminded us earlier this summer meekness means strength under control. It's through both of those that we will see truth and justice stand. And it says here that we will see it happen miraculously and in a way that will astonish us. And I believe that because of this, it's more important than ever to be on the side of truth and the side of the Lord.
Absolutely. Psalm 45. And speaking of warriors, Danielle, warriors who are fighting firmly and under control, Ray Garofalo, as you said, longtime House representative here in Louisiana from House District 103, first elected in 2011. Now he is running for Senate District 1, which it covers St. Tammany, St. Bernard, and a small part of Orleans Parish. What a pleasure to have Representative Garofalo on. How are you, Ray?
Doing great, Chris. And I have to say, wow, Danielle, that scripture was very powerful. It's appropriate, and I hope I can live up to that. But that's kind of the way that I view myself after some of the things that I've been through.
I bet a lot of war.
Well, it depends on how you define war, and I mean, I believe that we're in that war for our cultural issues and for our country. So, and I'm prepared to go out and do what we have to do to win that war. But you also mentioned statesman, and that's a quote that I use quite often because, as you know, politicians look into the next election, and a statesman is looking to the next generation. And for you to use that term regarding me, really, it humbles me because I know that I've always run my office and I run my life as though I'm a statesman. And I really appreciate that you picked up on that. And I hope it wasn't just rhetoric because I can tell you that's how I live. And I'm not going to change that. It's something that I think is important. I wish that we had more statesmen in office. But we have what we have. So I believe now it's up to those of us who see the big picture to live the big picture and to try to drag those others along with us so that we're making the right decisions for the next generation. And that you touched my core when you said that. I had to comment on it.
Yeah.
So I
And
appreciate
Ray, I have to say that it was not just a throwaway line. One thing that Chris and I have really kind of held the drumbeat on this election season is that there are politicians who are willing to fight for their constituents, and they may be pretty great at fighting for their constituents, but people who can see the bigger picture. How is this, will I trade the state on the back of my district? What are the trade-offs that I'm making long-term mean? Am I doing this to get elected, or am I doing this because it's the right thing to do for the state, for my constituents, for the greater good? And that's certainly something we've seen you in action doing.
Well, again, I don't know any other way to do it. And I think that I was born to do this. I know that Chris knows my story with my health issues in the past. I had the brain tumor in 98 and I had prostate cancer in 2008.
Wow.
And I'm blessed with family. I'm blessed with my health. I'm blessed in so many ways in this life that I don't believe in coincidences. I believe that God has me on a path to fight for those issues that he believes, or that his plan for the human race. And I don't want to sound like I have no special connections, but I do believe that in life, certain people have the ability to rise above and view things from the 30,000 foot level. And I believe that I was blessed with that. And again, not that it's anything special or I'm anything holy or a prophet or anything like that, but I do try to run my life as though, how is this decision going to affect the next generation? Not, is this going to hurt me from getting reelected? That's too short term of a view for me. I have to look at the long term, and I always have done that.
Yeah. Ray, you said that a politician looks to the next election, a statesman looks to the next generation. I think that's so powerful and so very true. And that phrase brings me to a piece of legislation that you brought back in 2021, House Bill 564. As most of our listeners know, and most American citizens know, there is an effort to permeate public school curricula throughout the country with this critical race theory, this critical gender theory, and the wolves are circling the door in Louisiana as well with regard to this pernicious education doctrine. And you brought a bill back in 2021, HB 564, as I said, which was a very simple but very important piece of legislation, which simply would have statutorily prohibited categorizing the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, or Louisiana for that matter, as systematically or systemically racist or sexist. Do you think that's something that most Louisianans agree with and would go along with? Talk about why you brought that legislation, Ray, and why it remains so important.
Well, again, I'm no prophet, I'm no oracle, but I do pay attention and I do a lot of research, Chris. And it was apparent to me at that point, as chairman of education, in addition to everything else that we were working on, that the issue of indoctrination in the classroom was becoming pernicious. And indeed, a lot of people were contacting me as chairman and giving me information about what they were seeing going on in the classroom and in training for teachers and staff and for others in the education system that was forcing them to take DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion training. And indeed, our universities and even our K through 12 schools were starting to devote a lot of their resources toward that effort. So when we started researching it and started looking at the fundamentals and exactly what that stood for, it wasn't just the CRT, it was also the gender training. And that was, again, one of the things that people were complaining to me about. So we looked at what other states were doing. We looked at the root causes. We quickly determined that this was a Marxist move to try to split up the United States citizens so that we weren't just Americans, but we were either Black or white Americans, or we were transgender versus non-transgender Americans. And it's all an effort to try to implement socialism in this country. And I don't want to get deep and I don't want to sound like I'm a conspiracy theorist, but it's pretty apparent when you look at the research, when you look at the history of the movement to implement Marxism, that that's exactly what's going on here. In the 60s in the United States, the Marxists tried to split us up based on our class. But they quickly found out that the middle class in the United States was so strong that they really couldn't get anywhere with that. So the new splitting is coming now in the 2000s with gender and race. And it's very pernicious. And it's because they were successful in infiltrating our higher ed classrooms in the 80s and 90s, and beginning in the 60s, but more so in the 80s and 90s. They've trained our teachers now, the teachers that are coming out, graduating from the universities and going into the K through 12 system, that are now teaching our younger children who are so vulnerable to this. And when you have a teacher that's bigger than life in a classroom, when you're in second or third grade, that's gospel to them. What the teacher says is true. So they're now training our younger citizens, our younger students, that Marxism is right, that the United States is bad, that your white friend may be holding you back from succeeding in life. Or, if you're white, you should feel guilty because your ancestors are not your ancestors, because other white people 150 years ago were not fair to black people. Or, maybe you're not really a male, maybe you're a female. It's all an effort to try to split up Americans, instead of people viewing their traditional American values, the values that this country was founded on. They're now focusing on gender and race issues, which is just a way to split us up.
Yeah, very well said, Ray. And I'll say that if they are successful, and hopefully, God willing, they won't be, but if they are successful in convincing the next generation that our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution, are intrinsically racist documents that are not worth fighting for, not worth preserving, at that point, we truly have lost the republic. And that is why I believe it was so important for you to bring this legislation. Now, the legislation was not successful. Danielle and I have talked about this at length, and it was not successful because of the actions of rhinos in our legislature, which we're on the verge of getting rid of a good number of those. Ray, are you going to bring similar legislation as a state senator when you're elected to the Senate?
I plan to, Chris. I mean, there are several issues that we have to address. Number one's the library issue, which I'm sure I've been working on very hard. Number two, especially in the district that I represent now and the district that I will represent as a senator, is the insurance crisis. But very closely related to that is the indoctrination issue, which I believe is just very harmful to our students. And schools are meant to educate our students and give them the basics that they need to succeed in life: reading, writing, arithmetic, and accurate history, not to indoctrinate them into a political way of thinking. And again, I've gotten into the reasons why they want to do it, but that's the tools that they're using to do that. And they're trying to bring them into a political way of thinking. But before I move on, I want to just touch on real quick. I mean, you mentioned our constitutional republic, and that to me is the big picture. That's looking at why they want to do this. We're the most successful country in the history of the world, bar none. And we've given more people the opportunity to succeed. We've taken people out of bondage. In fact, we ended slavery. So when you compare the United States, this experiment that our founders were so brilliant and they had so much foresight when they wrote the Constitution and when they wrote the Declaration of Independence. When you look at that, in a mere 235 years, we've become the leader in the world. But if you look around, in the big picture, there's no other country where you have the freedoms and the liberties that you have in the United States. If we lose that, I don't believe you will ever see that experiment repeated in the history of mankind. Look, I'm not trying to be a fatalist. What I am trying to say is we really have to do everything that we can, and we have to fight back very hard against this attempt to kill the constitutional republic that we have. So I don't mean to harp on that too much, but you hit the nail on the head. That's it. If we don't fight with everything that we have, and having been the victim of cancellation, I can tell you that the other side will not stop. They're going to do everything that they can, and they're going to continue to do it until they win.
Yeah. And they're not interested, Ray, and this is something that a lot of very good-hearted conservatives may not understand. The other side is not particularly interested in being fair. They're not particularly interested in being intellectually honest. They're interested in winning at any cost. And that's something that we always have to keep in mind, because to know your adversary is very, very important, and to know how they operate and what motivates them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it any better.
Absolutely. And Ray, on the topic of fighting for the freedom, for our personal liberties, fighting for the future of our republic, you were part of a small group of legislators who stood firmly for the people and against the governor for reopening the state in 2020 due to COVID. And I think, as an aside, it bears mentioning that your opponent, Bob Owen, did nothing at that time to support the people. But with talk of COVID and lockdowns resurfacing, I think very conveniently around election time, what is your perspective on that, on the possibility of lockdowns? And should something like that happen again before Edward's term is up, what would you be doing well, I guess his term would be up. You may not be elected yet, but anyway, what would you do as a state senator or even in your current seat?
The same thing we did before. We have methods in the House and in the Senate to overrule a gubernatorially declared emergency or any executive order from the governor. And I think that we have to do everything that we can to educate our colleagues. I'm talking about myself, the Freedom Caucus, the Conservative Caucus, to make sure that we're protecting the citizens. And look, I'm just coming at this. I'm not an MD. But I'm coming at this as a guy who's done a lot of research on the issue. And it's pretty apparent to me that there were so many flaws with the information that we were receiving on COVID and the numbers. And when we found out, and I had one of the doctors, I had the honor and the ability to chair a co-education health and welfare committee meeting. And we had some experts at the table, MDs, as well as Department of Health officials. And, when I asked the question, well, do we get false positives on the COVID test if somebody has the flu? And the answer to that question was yes. Then I'm sitting there and I tried to ask the follow-up question, well, then how do we know that the COVID numbers that the Department of Health is putting out and that the federal government is putting out are accurate? Well, of course, nobody could answer that. So I just found it astounding, and I still find it astounding that the government would have the ability to stifle the public the way that occurred during COVID. So bottom line, to directly answer your question, I will fight with every tool that we have to prevent that from happening again. And I think when I saw the text or the Facebook post from, was it Southern University? One of our universities.
I think Grambling.
Grambling put out a post that they were now going to implement or impose the mask requirement again. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. And then I started doing the research and I saw that, okay, well, there's a resurgence. Well, what the news reports and the mainstream media didn't say was, yeah, there's a resurgence, but it's no more harmful than the flu. And in fact, a lot of cases, what we're seeing is that the people that got it had less symptoms and less severity than the flu. So where do we draw that line? Why does the government say, okay, well, it's flaring up again, so all of a sudden we have to implement mask mandates and we're going to start closing businesses and schools? To me, it's such an arbitrary line.
It is. It's like COVID gets the brand name that allows lockdowns and mandates.
Well, and again, at the risk of sounding like a conspiracy theorist, in the research that I've done, it shows me that this is all the government's test to see how far they can push the population.
Exactly. That's my perspective as well.
Well, I didn't think I'd get any arguments here.
No. And Ray, to follow up on that, I don't know that there's ever been a country or a civilization that's responded to a pandemic the way that our country did in 2020. Historically and traditionally, you find out which elements of the population are vulnerable, make sure that they're well taken care of, and make sure that their safety and their lives are preserved. But the idea of locking down an entire state or locking down an entire country of healthy people to whom this COVID or pandemic poses really no threat, certainly no fatal threat. It struck me and many others as just bizarre that they would respond that way. And the only way that causes it to make any sense is, as you just said, it's not really an exercise of benevolence for the public to try to do the right thing. It's really a test to see just how far they can go in destroying our liberty and our freedom. And it's just a fact, that's the way it went down. But thank you for standing up in 2020 with Alan Seabaugh and a number of others. And no thanks to your opponent, Representative Owen, who did absolutely nothing to help when Louisiana citizens were suffering across the state in a way that I've never seen before. But more broadly than that difference between you and your opponent, Ray, what would you say to our listeners separates you more generally from your opponent and should motivate them to vote for you for state senate as opposed to your opponent?
Well, look, Chris, from every metric, I'm the best candidate. There's no question. I'm not here to talk about my opponent, but what I can say about me is, and I can get to the basics. I've been an attorney for over 30 years. I've been in the legislature for 12 years. While during my term, my stint in the legislature, I was chairman for 4 years of the Civil Law and Procedure Committee, and I was chairman of the House Education Committee for 2 years. From every aspect of that leadership experience, I'm the better candidate. I was a reserve deputy for several years back in the 70s and 80s. So I have on the street crime fighting experience. I worked at Loyola University for 12 years. And while Loyola's budget pales in comparison to the state's budget, many of the budget principles and the ideals that an institution like Loyola operate under are very similar to the same ideals and procedures that the state uses. So it gave me a tremendous amount of experience dealing with that institutional mindset of different departmental budgets and how they manage their budgets and why they make some of the decisions that they make. So from all of those aspects, life, I'm a father and a grandfather. I've had the health issues that I've had. I've built several successful businesses that continue to operate successfully to this day. And, I don't like to pat myself on the back, but I'm able to fund my own campaign because of my hard work, my tenacity. And I bring all of that experience base to the legislature with me. And I would challenge anyone to question anybody that's running against me about their qualifications just as hard as they challenge me on it. And indeed, if you look at my website, I have a lot of my biographical information, my background, my accomplishments, the things that I've done, the things that I want to do on my website. So I would challenge you to go to anyone who's running against me's website and see what they have on their website. It's really the difference is stark. So from that perspective, I'll leave you with that. That's the most I will say, regarding a comparison piece at this point. But certainly, I know that if your listeners are doing their research, they will see that I'm absolutely the most qualified candidate.
Yeah. And from what we've seen, Ray, from what we've read and what we've heard, your message is resonating broadly in the district. How is, from your perspective, the race looking, and what kind of feedback are you getting out there?
We're picking up more and more support every day. We know that it's 3.5 times the size of a House district. So from a boots on the ground perspective, Chris, it's a lot. You can't possibly walk and hit every door in the district. So without giving away any campaign strategy at this point, we've developed methods to deal with that and to reach as many of the voters personally as we can. We're working on that really hard. We think our message is the right message. Certainly, we're letting people know that especially regarding the chairmanship, being removed from the chairmanship of the House Education Committee because I stood for my principles. When people hear about that, I mean, their eyes light up. So we just need to make sure that we're successful in getting our message out. And as I said, every day we're meeting with movers and shakers and those people who influence the community. And I like to use the phrase, the dominoes are falling. So we feel very cautiously optimistic at this point, but we're always, as I have in all of my previous races, we will always run as though we're running from behind until the votes are counted.
I love it.
Well said.
And Ray, well, one, we're so thrilled that it's going so well for you. And I have to say you just exude vision, you exude energy. It doesn't seem to me like you're slowing down. I think you have your foot on the gas. What is motivating you to continue to serve after 12 years in the House? And what do you hope to accomplish in the Senate? And, not just for your district, but as you've said, for the state at large.
Well, let me give you a little background. Of course, my wife and I had a lot of discussions before I decided to run for Senate because, as I've already mentioned, God has blessed me in many ways, and I don't need the extra work.
Yeah.
I don't need the extra phone calls, texts, and emails. I could very easily ride off into the sunset and be very happy with my kids and grandkids and doing the little chores around the house that I truly enjoy doing, that I really haven't had time to do because of the campaign and because I'm in office. And initially, we were going to run for Senate. One of the issues they're trying to bring up is that, and I don't duck from issues, as both of you know, but they're trying to say that, we had bought a house in Slidell later on, and he's been in Slidell all his life. Well, we bought the house in Slidell when I was running for lieutenant governor. And Billy Nungesser and I are friends. He was going to run for governor. I was going to run for lieutenant governor, because I had some name recognition around the state because I had been canceled. And, some people say it's negative name recognition, but the fact is name recognition is name recognition. Well, my wife and I made the conscious decision and an informed decision. We wanted to move to the Slidell area because we love it here. So we bought the house, and Billy decided after that to go ahead and rerun for lieutenant governor. And I'm glad he did, because I think he's the best lieutenant governor the state's ever seen, but that's my personal opinion. Anyway, we rolled on from there. And now they're trying to accuse me of being a quote unquote carpetbagger. That, I bought the home that I have in Treasure Isle just to run for Senate. And nothing could be further from the truth. But I get it. I have thick skin. Bottom line is, I see pretty clearly, after being on this earth for 65 years, being an attorney for 30 years, being in the legislature for 12 years. So I've been inside and outside of the rails, and I see pretty clearly the dynamic that we have set up and what's going on and what the policy issues that are affecting the dynamics of this state trying to be taken over from the activists, and this country trying to be taken over from the activists. And I believe God has given me that vision so that I can inform, educate others, my colleagues, as well as the members of the public, to his way of understanding and the Judeo-Christian values that this country was founded on, and the liberty that this country was founded on. And I think at this point in history, it's important that we have somebody in office that does that. Because I've been blessed in so many ways, I'm basically, and I don't want to make it sound like it's a big sacrifice for me, because I'm not trying, I'm not looking for sympathy. It is a sacrifice. There's no question about it. But I don't do it because I want sympathy. I do it because I believe I'm here for a reason. And I believe I have the skills, the education, the experience to impart that to others. So it's a long answer to your question, but that's truly, I mean, people laugh at me. They say, Ray, you're pretty open. I say, yeah. Well, number one, transparency is primary with everything that I do. But number two, I think the more open and transparent I am, the more people respond to it, and they say, hey, maybe we should check out what this guy's saying. So anyway, that's the basis of my motivations.
There's a certain credibility that comes with being completely open and completely transparent. No question about that, Ray, which you always have been. I'll say that if the carpetbagger issue, if that's the issue that they're focused on, I would say that that ship is not only rudderless, but in all likelihood sinking. And that's my opinion, not yours. But that does not seem to be a very weighty issue to be criticizing you on. But I want to close out, Ray, by asking you this, because I'll tell you that if there's one primary issue that concerns our listeners, in fact, the state of freedom and LeCag are both predicated on this concern and this fundamental premise, which is the steady erosion of our freedom, the steady erosion of our individual liberty under a heavy-handed government. And people are quite frankly scared to death of it. I want you to talk for a few minutes about your view generally of individual freedom, of state sovereignty, and how that philosophy has informed and will continue to inform your legislative priorities going forward.
I have to tell a little story here, Chris. We've talked about those issues for me already in this conversation, but I was asked to speak to the Daughters of the American Revolution. I think it was about 2 months ago. And I said, great. No, you want me to talk about my experiences? What do you want me to talk about? They said, well, let's talk about the founding of the country. So, I'm a student of history. I have done a lot of research. I went to law school. I took constitutional law, all these courses that I thought really informed me about the founding of this country. But when I started researching some of the issues that were involved with the drafting and signing and all those issues surrounding the Declaration of Independence, I learned things that I didn't know. Let me share a couple of those things with you. Number one, many of the signers of the Declaration, they weren't just mechanics, or they weren't mechanics back then, but they weren't just day laborers. I mean, these guys were jurists, they were attorneys, they were wealthy property owners. These guys were men of means, and they were not uneducated. Second thing I learned was that they didn't release those names for 6 months until after they signed. And the reasoning behind that was because King George had hit squads out looking for those men who signed that declaration, and they were hanging them. Many of those men lost their lives, but those who didn't lose their lives lost their personal fortunes. Their families were split up. Many of them were forced to go into hiding. I mean, it's amazing what these visionary geniuses, as I phrase them, went through to form this experiment that is the United States of America. But everything that they did was based on liberty and Judeo-Christian values. And when you look at that and what that has meant to the last 235 years of this experiment and how fragile that is, but the sacrifices that these men made, anybody who understands that, then you get a much better basis for why we have to fight with everything that we can to make sure that we preserve this constitutional republic. And I know that was a long answer, but for me, it's fundamental that this is something that we were given, I believe, by God, but it's something that these men, these visionaries, both with the Declaration and with the Constitution, had the wisdom and the foresight to give us as a gift. And if we don't realize that it was a gift and that it's fragile and that we're but one generation away from losing it, to quote Ronald Reagan, we're going to lose it. And because when you see some of the apathy among the people and the constituency and the general population today, and you see the lack of knowledge and the lack of appreciation for what we have, it amazes me that, now, of course, again, I've studied it more than a lot of people have, but we have to make sure that we're educating our students and the rest of the population, and certainly my colleagues in the legislature, with that knowledge. And if there's no other message that I can impart today, that's, I believe, the most important thing, that we have to do everything we can to preserve the freedoms that we have in this country. And a lot of that has to do with the Judeo-Christian values that I was raised with, and that I'm sure that both of you were raised with.
Ray, there's no way that I could have expressed that any better. That really does detail the philosophy that I've had much of my life, and it's amazing the intellectual revolutionaries that our founding fathers were, and the sacrifice that they made to give us this exercise and freedom that we have. And they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And it's important, as you said, Ray, to note that many of them gave their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors. I think if we go through, in fact, I've done it recently, gone through and sort of detailed what happened to the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, and many of them met with a fate that was far, far less favorable than the lives that they had lived before signing the Declaration of Independence.
Not to interrupt, but I'll be glad to share my research because I found the same results.
Yeah.
And it's very drastic when you look at what happened to these brilliant guys. But I agree with you 100%, Chris.
Yeah, very, very powerful. Well, Ray, how do people get in touch with you, to donate to you, and to get the word out more and more about your campaign?
Very easy, Chris. It's I've already mentioned it. With in addition to having all of my background information and some of my plans and goals on there, it's simply www.voteray.com. And one of my hosting companies is having problems, so sometimes you have to put in that www. It's just www.voteray.com. But our contact information is on there. We have a donation page, in addition to all of the vast amount of information about me that we have posted on there. And I hope that your listeners will go on there and not just research me, but if you're in this district, and I would encourage everyone from around the state, please research your candidates before you make your vote and make an informed decision. Know who you're voting for, because a lot of the problems that we see in DC and Baton Rouge, and even on the local level, is that we don't do enough research. And it's easy for a candidate to give all of the conservative talking points. Oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But when they get elected, then voters get voters' remorse because they didn't do the research and they didn't look into that individual's background, what they've done, what they've hidden from the voters. So please do your research, because we have way too many people in the legislature and in DC that they're good at the talking points, but they're really poor at sticking up for those principles that made this country great. So
You're so right.
Highly encourage that.
You're absolutely right. And I was just having that same conversation with my dad last night, and we were lamenting the fact that the legislation to make it easier to recall ineffective legislative officials, or I guess elected officials, didn't make it through this go round. But I think that's one we should prioritize for next session, just because of this exact reason. People, telegraph who they want you to, think they are, and then they're not able to follow through with the with the goods.
And Ray, a point you made a minute ago, tucked into a longer statement that you made, was sometimes they hide things from their constituents. Since Danielle and I have been doing this for 2 or 3 years now, Ray, it is amazing how much good legislation gets killed secretly down there because the people who are killing it don't want their constituents to know about it. And it's amazing how bad legislation sometimes gets moved forward in a way that's very difficult to detect also. But the discrepancy between what so many of these representatives are saying to their constituents and what they're actually doing in the legislature is downright stark. And that doesn't exist with you, I have to say. You're the same way in the legislature as you are back home in your district, and you've always been that way. And you've always been a strong fighter for us, for the state of freedom, for LeCag, for citizens across Louisiana. And we're just very gratified that you're running and that you have the energy that you have to get the ball into the end zone. October 14th, I hope we're all celebrating with you, sir.
Yes, absolutely. And we support you, Ray, and we endorse you. And I'm just so grateful that we have such a kindred spirit when it comes to individual liberties, when it comes to the very just uniqueness and an absolute divine gift that this country is. And we're so happy to be fighting alongside of you.
Well, I appreciate that very much. Those kind words really mean a lot to me. But I have to tell you that the resurgence, and I've seen it in the last 12 years, not resurgence, but the growth of groups like LACAG and this podcast, the way that more of our citizens are getting involved in the process is very inspirational to me, because we need groups like yours because of exactly what you said, and about how the process works inside the rails. And I made a comment about that before, but that informs my thinking. And I can tell you, until you're inside the rails, you really don't know. So now I view it as part of my mission to make sure that those who are not inside the rails understand what's going on inside the rails. And, Chris, I know you've been doing this for a long time and you've seen a lot, but again, most people won't understand until you're in office. But because there's a lot of different factors that go into a lot of these decisions, and I'm not taking up for anybody, but the fact that you guys are so involved on the outside and doing everything you're doing, and I want to be a resource for you, and you've already been a resource for me. So, I mean, I hope I will tell you, regardless of the outcome of the election, we will continue working together to better Louisiana and our country, and to protect those freedoms that we all agree are fundamental to who we are as a nation.
Well, we are gratified to have had you on today, Ray. Keep us in the loop on how things are going along. God bless and Godspeed, and let's win on October 14th.
Absolutely. I thank you guys for the opportunity, and we'll definitely be following up.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
Great talking to you, Ray. Thank you.
God bless.
Chris, I just love his deep love for the Constitution in this country and for our freedoms. I mean, you can just feel the passion coming out of his voice about this. There's no way that he could put that on.
No, it's definitely from the heart. Ray does have a deep and rich understanding of the history of the country, the Constitution, and really, as he said, how fragile our freedom is. The state Senate needs Ray Garofalo, Danielle. Got to have him in there with the Alan Seabaws and the Valerie Hodges and others, the Blake Miguez's, to continue to move our state forward in the right direction. This is the opportunity, and we just need him in there. And and as Ray is talking, I'm sitting here thinking, the contrast between him and his opponent, Bob Owen, is just like stark. It's like I can't imagine how this would even be a close decision for people over in Jefferson Parish and St. Charles. I hope it's not.
No, I can't imagine it's close, and we're going to be part of helping to expose the differences between the two of them. But I think one last thing just to say about Ray is that he clearly and absolutely understands what's at stake. I mean, he understands that the future of our republic is at stake. This isn't the future of his election. This isn't the future of some short-lived policy, issue. This is an existential issue. And I really just appreciate the fact that he conveys that so clearly, and he's standing up for us. And I'll just say, Chris, his opponent also has been serving in the state house, and his name is Bob Owens. And he was, as I mentioned earlier, he was silent during the COVID lockdowns. He did nothing to support the people, the small businesses, the students who needed desperately to go back to school.
Didn't say a word. Didn't say a word about it. Just, as you would say, bent the knee to the governor. That's not leadership. And, that is just one of many contrasts between Owen and Ray Garofalo.
Yes, and another one along the same lines is that he voted in favor of Barbara Freiberg's Pharmacy Administration of Vaccines bill. And this is one, obviously, that we've spent a lot of time talking about, the potential for harm here. It's not so much that on its face, maybe it's not a terrible thing, but the risk for adverse events, the risk for pharmacists not knowing the medical history of a particular patient that comes through for a vaccine is very high.
Pharmacists who don't know anything about the medical history of a 7-year-old should not be administering vaccines to 7-year-olds, any vaccine, whether experimental or otherwise, without a doctor's prescription. It was just a horrible piece of legislation designed to line the pockets of big box pharmacies. Fortunately, it failed. But, Bob Owen voted for it in the Health and Welfare Committee and on the House floor. And, that's a big deal. to us, and should be noted.
Yeah, and another topic that's a big deal to us, which I think we've touched on during this episode already, is state sovereignty. And he voted against two bills. Let me see here. He was absent for a state sovereignty bill that Representative Edmonston brought that would have protected us from federal and international overreach and mandates from groups like the World Health Organization.
Yeah. So Owen can show up in the Health Welfare Committee and vote for a bill that allows vaccine interns to give 7-year-olds vaccines without a prescription, but he can't show up in the Health and Welfare Committee to vote for legislation that would declare Louisiana's right to not to enforce arbitrary federal health decrees like lockdowns and masks and vaccine mandates and all the rest of it. Just doesn't show up to vote. I told you before, Danielle, I think that that's one of the most important pieces of legislation of the session. And it was a real opportunity to assert Louisiana sovereignty in the face of federal overreach on all these health decrees. Well, Owen doesn't show up for the vote. And to me, that's remarkable and it's inexcusable.
It is inexcusable, and I think it should also be quite embarrassing. I mean, Chris, he was also absent for the final passage of a bill which I consider to be the crown jewel of state sovereignty bills that have been brought, and that was the SCR 21 that Senator Cathy brought.
Yeah, SCR 21, Senate concurrent resolution, passed both the House and the Senate, and it's a solemn declaration, just declaring Louisiana's solemn constitutional right to nullify unconstitutional federal actions, going all the way back to Madison and to Jefferson, the Ninth and 10th Amendments. It was a hugely important piece of legislation and passed both chambers. And where was absent Owen for the vote? He wasn't there and didn't vote on that important piece of legislation. I don't think there was anything more important going on than being present and voting for that legislation. And he wasn't there.
Absolutely. And we're starting to really see a pattern here because he was also absent, Chris, for the final passage in the House of arguably the biggest bill of the session, which was Representative Furman's bill to protect minors from genital mutilation and chemical castration. Didn't show up.
Was absent for the final vote in the regular session. Now, he claims to have supported it, but, your actions speak louder than your words. And this was the final passage in the House. And I'm not sure where absent Owen was, but he wasn't in the House chamber for that vote, as you said, to prevent the chemical castration of our minors. And the voters over in Jefferson and St. Charles certainly have a right to know that.
Yeah, they absolutely have a right to know. And if you are a constituent in Senate District 1 and Bob Owen is telling you that he wants to work for you, this is the kind of work he does. He's not showing up for work. And I have a big, big problem with that. In fact, we looked it up and he was absent 24% of the time, almost a quarter of the time. He was absent for votes in the House. And I just want to underscore that this is a part-time legislature. This is not like he shows up a quarter of the time out of 1 year, which would also be a huge problem. But they were there, Chris, 2 months, maybe 3?
April 9th to June 9th, every year for 2 months, they meet to do the people's business. And during that period of time in 2023, absent Owen was not present for 24% of the votes taken. And my understanding from our research is that he's number four on the list of most frequent absentees on votes in the legislature.
The statistics speak for themselves, really. And Chris, just one more thing here. Actually, I think we have a couple, but I think this one is particularly disgusting. So Senator Cloud brought a bill, which we talked about quite a lot during session, and the bill was aiming to get pornographic material out of the hands of minors in public libraries. And we talked to Senator Cloud about this, and it was a great victory that it happened. But there was an amendment that watered down the bill brought by Representative McGee, and Bob Owen voted for watering down the amendment. Do you want to talk a little bit about
Yeah.
what that means?
Absolutely. In its original form, Danielle, as our listeners know full well, librarians would have a responsibility to ensure that children are shielded from inappropriate materials in the library. That's the bill in its original form. Well, as you said, Representative McGee offered an amendment that would have required 10 parents or concerned third parties to make complaints in order to trigger a review process within the library. So if that amendment had passed, it would have relieved the librarians of any independent responsibility they would have had to make sure that the children are shielded from this horrible material. But it failed, fortunately, but Owen voted for it. And I don't quite understand why he would vote for something, an amendment in legislation that would relieve the librarians, the people who are the closest to the children there, and the people who know more than anyone else what is present in the library, why he would vote for an amendment that relieves them of independent responsibility to make sure that the children don't have access to this material. I think it's very insightful, and I think it's very telling. And fortunately, the amendment failed, and the bill did pass in its original form.
Well, it is wonderful. And I think just to put it in a slightly different way, Chris, it means this vote that he made put more onus on the parents, more responsibility on parents, and less on state employees who our tax dollars pay to do this job. So I just
Yeah,
find that absolutely
Exactly.
stunning that someone who calls themselves a conservative, someone who's out there asking for more people to vote for him to represent the interest of more people now as a state senator, is here voting in this way. It's just absolutely astounding. And then maybe just to round us out, he was among the crew who voted to bust the spending cap. And that just means that he votes in favor of the state and in favor of big government and against the people.
Yeah, he stood against the 19 conservative heroes in the House who refused to vote to bust the constitutionally approved spending cap. Owen, of course, stood with the establishment and voted to explode the spending cap, which allowed the spending of billions and billions of dollars of taxpayer money that was not authorized by the people. And one day, Danielle, you and I will go through the list of items that money was spent on, and our listeners are not going to be happy about it because it was often not spent on critical infrastructure. It was spent on things like football stadiums and band uniforms and certain woke projects that are not in the best interests of Louisiana citizens. It was really a wasteful boondoggle in many respects, and Owen voted for it, and the listeners certainly and the voters have a right to know that.
They do. And I think, hopefully for listeners who are in Senate District 1, the contrast and the decision is pretty clear at this point of who's the right person to support, who's going to fight for your interest, who's going to bring our state forward. And we can say unequivocally it's Ray Garofalo.
No question about it. This is one of those no-brainer votes, Danielle. The Senate needs leaders like Ray. You'll recall Alan said when he was on the show that the Senate is a place where very good legislation goes to die. Well, not with people like Ray Garofalo there and Alan Seabaugh and others. Just so important that Ray get in there. I'm glad to know that his race is going well. And I'm just very, very happy and pleased to be endorsing him from our platform today.
Me too. And Chris, if Bob Owen is running his campaign the way he shows up for work, then I guess Ray's got pretty smooth sailing.
Well, I don't think I could have said it any better than that. Never want to close out, Danielle, without thanking our many listeners across the state to the State of Freedom for subscribing, listening, sharing with your family and friends, donating to our podcast, and just joining us in this effort because without our listeners and our supporters, there's no way we could do what we're doing.
Yes. And just a reminder to the listeners that if you want to support fantastic, strong constitutional conservatives like Ray Garofalo, of course, you can donate to their campaigns directly, but we'd also love if you would support LeCag because we're supporting lots and lots of great candidates. All of the candidates that we're bringing to you on the State of Freedom, LeCag is supporting in some way. So you can do that at the LeCag website, lacag.org.
Yes, or if you want to just mail a check, LACAG, PAC, P.O. Box 64952, Baton Rouge, Louisiana 70896. And we are going to continue to assist these constitutional conservatives to get their message out, get their voice out, and to get over the finish line and return our legislature to the people, because, Danielle, that's what it's all about.
That is what it's all about, Chris. Amen.
Well, thank you for joining us today, listeners across the great Louisiana plain. We are moving forward each day, and we will continue to preserve the state of freedom in Louisiana.
Amen. Thanks for listening to the State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to the State of Freedom, LLC, at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, lacag.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.